Hi everyone, so we'll continue memorizing from the book of Hebrews. So today we are going to memorize Hebrews chapter 4 verse 2. I'll read that first. Hebrews chapter 4 verse 2. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message which they heard did not benefit them because it did not meet with faith in the hearers. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message which they heard did not benefit them because it did not meet with faith in the hearers. So I'll read 4, 1 and 2 together. Therefore, while the promise of entering his rest remains, let us fear lest any of you be judged to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message which they heard did not benefit them because it did not meet with faith in the hearers. So we saw that the God extended his promise to Israelite people. He told them that they will reach the promised land, but because of their unbelief, because of their hardness of heart, because of their rebellion, because of their disobedience, they all perished in the wilderness. Only Joshua and Caleb could enter the promised land. All others of that generation, they all perished in the wilderness because of their unbelief. So we meditated on that in detail, right? Why? Because their heart was away from God. There was no belief or faith in God, right? So when you hear, so same is applicable for us also. Jesus has promised us salvation. So he has promised us eternal rest. By his death and resurrection, he has obtained salvation for us and he has promised us eternal rest. But that remains a promise if we don't take it in faith, right? So if we also rebel against him, if we have rebellion in our heart, if we have unbelief in our heart, if we disobey him, then we will also not enter the promised land, right? So we should be very careful about that. So here we see, for good news came to us just as to them, but the message which they heard did not benefit them because it did not meet with faith in the hearers. So just hearing the message alone is not sufficient for salvation, or it's not sufficient to enter the eternal rest. So we should hear the message with the right disposition, right? We should hear the message with the right attitude or the right transformation of heart. Because of the original sin, we all have an inclination towards sin, right? Because of Adam and Eve's original sin, we all have the inclination towards sin, right? But we should overcome that. When we come close to Jesus, when we come close to God, we should transform our heart. We should remove all hatred from our heart. We should remove our pride. We should remove all jealousy from our heart. We should remove our lustful thoughts. We should remove our selfishness. We should remove our affinity to power. We should remove all that and we should stay really humble, right? We should have that true communion with God. We should purify ourselves. When we come close to God, we should purify ourselves and we should have faith in him. So as a child, we should believe in him. We shouldn't have any unbelief in our heart, right? So if we rebel against God, if we disobey God, if we have unbelief in our heart, just like Israelite people, we will also perish in the journey. We will not enter the promised land, right? So that is something that we should be careful. So here we see, for good news came to us just as to them. It's the same thing, right? God promised them eternal rest. God promised them the promised land, right? The Canaan land. Same way, Jesus has promised us eternal rest. He said, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. He's gone there to prepare a place for you and he will take us there. But that is the promise. But only if we believe in that, right? If we have any unbelief in our heart, if we disobey him, if we rebel against him, we may not reach that eternal rest, right? So that is very important. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message which they heard did not benefit them because it did not meet with faith in the hearers. When there is no true transformation of heart, when we don't have the personal loving relationship with God, whatever we do in the name of religion, that will become mere external observance, right? So our heart is not purified. Our heart is away from God. The Jews were very strict in obeying Sabbath, but Jesus called them hypocrites because they didn't know true love. There is no love in them, right? They were not loving their neighbors. They were not helping others. So that's the reason he has called them hypocrites. In many places we see that. So I read couple of the instances. One is given in Mark 3, 1-6. Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand, and they watched him to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and Jesus healed them. And again we see in Luke chapter 13, 10-17. I'll read that also quickly. And there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity for 18 years. She was bent over and could not fully straighten herself. And when Jesus saw her, he called her and said to her, "Woman, you are freed from your infirmity." And he laid his hands upon her, and immediately she was made straight, and she praised God. But the ruler of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to people, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, and not on Sabbath day." Then the Lord answered him, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger, and lead it away to water it? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day?" As he said this, all his adversaries were put to shame, and all the people rejoiced at all the glorious things that were done by him. So if we don't have the true faith or true love or that transformation of heart, right, then we will, whatever we do, it will be just mere external observance. That will not take us to the promised land. So we should be mindful about this. And when we meditate on this, we should also examine our conscience and see if we have that love in our heart, if we have that faith in our heart, or do we have that rebellion in our heart. So we should examine our conscience and ask for God's grace to change our heart or to transform our heart. So with this, I'll conclude today's meditation. I'll read that again. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 2. "For good news came to us just as to them, but the message which they heard did not benefit them, because it did not meet with faith in the hearers." Thank you. God bless you all.